Up next is an armchair Q&A discussion that will provide an overview of the upcoming legislative session, and you'll also hear about some housing-related issues that might arise in that session. The discussion will be led by Monica Gerhardt-Hambrick, who serves as the Director of Policy and Communications for the Greater New Orleans Fair Housing Action Center. Monica has been a member of the GNOFAC staff since 2011, and she directs our communications efforts as well as the policy team. Joining her is State Senator J.B. Morrell, who's the newly appointed chair of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee in the Senate. And also joining Monica is State Senator Karen Carter-Peterson. I'm going to just say a little bit more about Senator Peterson. She's a Democrat who has served in the Louisiana State Senate since 2010. Both of these legislators have had a long and distinguished career as public servants, and they have stood strong on issues of equity and social justice. And the Fair Housing Action Center remains grateful for their partnership and their leadership. So thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, both of you, for joining us today. And thank you, Senator Peterson, for hosting us in your district. We appreciate that. I'm not going to go into either one of their bios because they're public officials and their bios are available on the State Senate's website or on our own conference website, fitforking.org. Because I know that we want to jump right into content and no one wants to listen to me, we want to listen to them. So the plenary panel that we just went into, that we just closed out, focused on affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a new regulation issued by the Obama administration, in which requires jurisdictions, cities, states, counties, that receive federal HUD funds to not only not discriminate, but also to spend their money in such a way as to promote desegregation and bring housing opportunity to every neighborhood. And we in this room know that housing choice and family economic security are inextricably linked, right? We know that when housing choice is limited, the cost of housing goes up. And that can be either the direct cost of rent or mortgage, and it also can be the indirect cost of living in a high poverty neighborhood. So, for example, increased expenses on food, transportation, banking, and other kinds of financial services, and the things that families are paying out of pocket goes up. So that given that Louisiana is about to go into a special session, as well as a regular session with our new governor, I wanted to ask the two of you how you think Louisiana family economic security will be impacted by the action that you all are about to take on the state's budget, and what are the greatest sort of challenges and opportunities over the next month?
Well, I thank you for having Monica, and certainly all of you and all of the advocates that are here. I appreciate all of the work that you all do in your individual and collective capacity to advance the ball on economic security, on housing, and all of those issues. The good thing is that this Monday we could celebrate. Those of us in the room, I suspect, are happier than you would be if there were the alternative being sworn in on Monday. So, it's not the end, but it's the beginning, right? And so the hard work, because if it were the alternative, we would be looking at a very different paradigm and a different outlook on a special session, in a general session. So the good thing is that the philosophy that now exists on the fourth floor of the mansion, which you'll hear more about, I understand, just shortly, is one of shared values, and we have a lot in common when it comes to equity. The rhetoric is not going to change. What you heard on the campaign trail of economic security, increasing the minimum wage, making sure that families have affordable health care, making sure that families are getting access to an equitable and affordable education. Those things now need to be implemented in policy. So the special session involves first dealing with the fiscal madness that we created collectively. Even though I took different votes oftentimes, I'm saying collectively because I'm a part of the institution. I didn't agree with it, but I'm a part of the institution, and I'm putting that behind me, and we're gonna fix it. The good thing is, right here in our own region, we've got a chairman of the Revenue and Fiscal. You may not, I think many of you understand what that means, but all of the tax policies, whether it's a tax credit, rebate, or an exemption, that has been, much of it has been given away for the last 8 years without any accountability, is now going to be governed in part by the gentleman sitting to my left. I'm very proud of him. And he is going to be very tough decisions, because there needs to be accountability in those expenditures, because that's where they were. Now on the other side, on the finance side, the spending side, the question is implications for families and economic security. And so those implications are going to be directed in part by how we deal with tax policy and the things that we've done over the last 8 years. And if we pull back, the rich can't get richer, the poor are hurting.
Right.
And so that can't happen. And so we have to make some policy changes in how we budget and how we fund things and who we give things away to. That's going to be hard. All of the work is going to be dictated, as our governor and president, they are very much aligned, as you saw yesterday, and talked about the challenges that they both faced when they took office. It's going to be dictated by the advocacy of people. There are going to be policies thrown out about where we want to go and how we want to fund it, but it won't happen because we have such a diverse state that we're proud of. We've got Republicans and Democrats, and we have whites and blacks and others from all geographical parts of the state. We think differently because we are human beings. We think differently about how to skin the cat. And I'm going to end it with this. Your advocacy with your legislators will dictate what we get done. It won't be any one individual. So if you believe that we should change tax policy to better fund housing initiatives, if you believe that we should change tax policy to make sure that we increase the minimum wage, if you think we should change policies to make sure women get paid equally, if you think we should change tax policy to make sure that educational institutions, K through 12 and higher ed, get funded adequately and not, we have to replenish the $800 million that was pulled out over the last 8 years, then it's hard work, we're rolling up our sleeves, and we need you to weigh in a big way.
Thank you. I think sometimes when we look at what has occurred, sometimes we gloss over the history without understanding exactly what has transformatively occurred in this instance. I take great pleasure and honor in being the first African American or New Orleanian in this position in over 20 years. When you look at what happened with the inauguration of Governor Edwards, who will be here shortly, it's important to both highlight the successes we had in the Senate with Governor Edwards' help and leadership and making sure we had diverse leadership. We have a Republican-controlled Senate, but the chairs of both money committees, both are Democrats and one's an African American. Now think about that. In a Senate where Democrats represent 1/3, we got the chair of both money committees are Democrats. That's leadership. And we thank Governor Edwards for that. Now, the same token, we can take some responsibility because we did not have similar success in the House.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many of you follow what occurred in the House, and we had an opportunity in an instance to have, for the first time in a very long time, a Democratic speaker for the city of New Orleans. And we have our own House cleaning to do because, for the large part, that did not occur because of the Democrat from New Orleans. And that's house cleaning that we as New Orleanians are going to have to deal with and account for at some point. But that was a tremendous opportunity lost, and it certainly makes our job a lot harder going into it. Now, I've spoken with the new speaker. He is, as far as Republicans go, a more moderate one, but things are going to be more difficult not having a Democrat in that seat. When you talk about the question as it was posed, there are two tenets of Governor Edwards' platform that apply to the situation at hand. One is equal pay for equal work, which in the state of Louisiana is abysmal. In the state of Louisiana, a woman on average makes 66 cents on the dollar, 67 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes. Now, when you think about this city, in this state, how many hardworking single mothers are raising families, it adds insult to injury that they are being underpaid for the real work they're doing. And that is one of the hallmarks of Governor Edwards' platform. The other issue, which is very, very simple, is a living wage. Minimum wage has not grown with the economy. The minimum wage that we have in the state is ridiculous. Every argument we've heard against raising the minimum wage has been completely refuted by the other states around us that have risen the minimum wage and seen more economic development and more success and opportunity with the risen minimum wage. These are going to be two very tough issues that will directly affect the availability of housing and the availability of opportunity, but it's going to require advocacy like y'all have done in the past to make people do the right thing in the legislature. So I cannot stress how important it is for people to show up and make their voice heard, because it is amazing to me, and Senator Peterson can speak to this as well, people don't understand how powerful it is when people show up and express that they are watching what we do. They will hold us accountable for our votes, and they absolutely believe that it is imperative that their legislators vote the way they're supposed to vote. And when you don't have that level of accountability and advocacy, putting forth an issue and holding your legislators accountable, and lets them do things that aren't in your best interest. So I look forward to working with all of you in the upcoming session.
Thank you both. And just as a non-profit, non-partisan 501c3 organization, just wanted to flag AHUD, ALHC, DOJ. Just want to flag that we look forward to working with all leadership on this issue.
Me too.
JP, I think you just touched on this, or Senator Morrell, that there's so many Louisiana families that are working hard or earn low wages that really limit housing choice. In a state where a quarter of our renters are paying more than half of their income towards rent or mortgage, and we know that outside of New Orleans, rents and mortgages might be even a little lower than in the city, right? We cannot build our way out of the current housing crisis. The Fair Housing Center supports policy interventions that help working families get ahead and rely less on the safety nets that are out there, right? So for example, a parent working minimum wage at $7.25 an hour would have to work 69 hours a week, almost 70 hours a week, in order to afford a one-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. So just as a follow-up question to what you just raised, what do you think are the prospects in the next legislative session for increasing the living wage?
The rotation. Okay, so there's a couple of points in there. Obviously, it's my intention to work with the governor to fight tooth and nail for an increase in the minimum wage, whether it's an immediate one or one phased over time. That ball has to move, because at this point, as a state, it makes us less competitive, and it just is fair and makes sense. More importantly, one of the other hats I wear as the chair of the committee, the chair of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee, is that I sit on the bond commission, and we deal with all of the construction projects taken forth throughout the state. Many different developers of low-income housing come through the bond commission, the Louisiana Housing Finance Corporation, seeking monies to build major construction. And over the years, from the cheap seats, when I was not a seat on the bond commission, there are many instances in which developers say they're doing market rate low-income housing, but they're really giving lip service to it. They'll build a major development, and they'll have the requisite amount of fair market housing or low-income housing to barely meet the minimum to be eligible for tax credits or for funding, but they're not doing much beyond that. And though I agree we're not going to build our way out of this, one of the things that has to be done is if you're going to come to the state and request state money to do massive construction for new housing, you have to have a realistic amount of set aside for low-income and market rate housing. Additionally, something that has really kind of percolated, especially in New Orleans, is the state has to weigh in on things like Airbnb. At the end of the day, when you have limited housing stock in any given city, and you have landlords but take it out because there is a process in which they can do short-term rentals over and over again without paying proper taxes, without being properly insured, and taking that stock out of the existing stock, it simply raises the cost of overall rent. So I know that's something that I've talked to Becky that we're going to work on because it's not fair. It's not fair to renters. It's not fair to the hotel motel industry because they pay a tremendous amount of taxes and fees back into the community for the privilege of renting out a room. And one of the real problems with Airbnb is that you have individuals who take legitimate rental stock and they're not paying those taxes and they're taking those units out of commerce. So that's one of the things that we're going to plan on tackling.
I know we have a very short time, we have to get to a couple of the questions, but I have been an advocate for increasing the minimum wage and the living wage for many years. Unfortunately, it's fallen on deaf ears. It's never come out of committee, and so I'm looking forward to the new makeup of the Senate Labor Committee, which I looked at this week. Looks a little more promising. And similarly, I'm hopeful that we can move it through the House. So with the leadership, you all have got to understand how big Monday was in that election prior. Having someone with those shared values, as Governor Edwards, is going to help us move the ball on so many fronts. So it's not just this issue, but he will pay for women, and those bills will also come. I'll add paid leave and sick leave. I tried to push those bills last year as well. The biggest opposition that we face is a challenge because both bodies are controlled by the other side. However, we're going to make the arguments about fairness and equity. And businesses don't permit businesses to just present rhetoric that, you know, it's just going to cost us more money if we increase the minimum wage. We need leadership also from the business community. I would hope that GNO Inc., the New Orleans Chamber of Commerce, I don't want to wait on lobbying to come. I already know what their script is, and I would hope that those entities come forward in their agenda that they present to us includes an increase in the minimum wage. That's leadership, and that's what we need to ask them.
Thank you both so very, very much for your time. And I know that we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us.